right, hello everyone, David Parsons here. Welcome to Nostalgia Trap. We are back from a little late summer hiatus. I want to explain what we've been up to and what the direction of the show is. And I also want to acknowledge just right off the bat and thank all the different Nostalgia Trap fans and listeners who wrote to me in the last month expressing concern or shock or outrage that the show was somehow over. I want to assure you the show is not over. Nostalgia Trap will never end as long as this heart still beats. I will be posting podcasts of some kind, and I want to talk a little bit today about what I've been up to, because I know, well, let me just give you the bullet points of what I've been up to and how the show might transform. Somewhat unexpectedly, in the last month, I have found myself starting my first semester of law school. And I want to explain a little bit more of that so you can hang around if you're interested. The reason I might want to share my story here is because so much of this podcast over the last 10 years, if you can believe it, so much of it is dipped into, my own career trajectory as an academic historian and someone who got a PhD during a really shitty moment in the academic job market. So I think it might be of interest to some of you out there to hear why I decided to go to law school at this point in my life. So I'll get into that. And the other bullet point, just to start us off, is that, the show is not ending. I think I just needed a moment and a breather to figure out what I want to do with it. So I'll talk a little bit about what the show will be like moving forward, but rest assured, you can look forward to lots of Nostalgia Trap episodes coming up in the near future, including one with Justin Rogers Cooper coming later this week. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so why am I in law school? What is going on with that? Have I become a lib cuck of the system? Or worse, a cop? I don't know. I don't know what people on the left think of lawyers. In fact, I think that's part of my interest in it, is the intersection of the left and the law. It's not really unfamiliar territory to this podcast or to my own sort of concerns with history. But let's go back in time, because this this podcast is often about the obsession with the past. I've been thinking maybe it's just my age. I'm in my mid-40s right now. It's sort of like it's the moment to reflect on your past and what brought you to this place. And for me, there are a lot of different elements that brought me to the place I am right now. But let me just, I guess, give you some highlights. In high school, I think I may have mentioned this on the podcast over the years. But in high school, I was really into being a lawyer. I participated in mock trial, which was part of our high school extracurricular activities. That was my extracurricular activity, was mock trial. All 4 years of high school, I was very active on the mock trial team. And by my freshman year, I was just sort of played one of the witnesses. Mock trial is kind of, there's a theatrical element to it, I guess, and that's part of what attracted me was the drama element of it. But I played one of the witnesses my freshman year, but every year subsequently, I was a lead attorney. I think I was a lead prosecutor a few years, a lead defense attorney, and that gave me such a boost. That was like the main thing I did in high school was mock trial, besides being co-captain of the Knowledge Bowl team, which was a sort of competitive quiz show. I can get into that later. But mock trial is what's important here. I was super into the law, and I think that 90s legal thrillers like Primal Fear, I've mentioned the Edward Norton movie, the Richard Gere, very influential on me. All of these sorts of TV shows and movies in the 90s that sort of cast the law as a theater of power and as a place where justice could be sought. I mean, it's not unlike reading like To Kill a Mockingbird or even people reading Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s. And sort of, as a young person, I was very attracted to to the law as a place where you could the good guys could win. People with no power could somehow achieve victories over the sinister forces that control the world. There are a million examples, but one of them I would say is that I really remember is Philadelphia, the film, the Jonathan Demme movie with Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks. I think most of you know that movie, but those kinds of courtroom dramas really hit me hard. And in the midst of being like a mock trial kid, I think this was a big direction for me. And as I recall, I was thinking that I was going to be a lawyer in my life. That was sort of what my direction was when I first started out going to UC Santa Barbara right out of high school. My first year, I was like, I'm a political science major. I'm going to go to law school. I'm like a little West Wing kid. I really am into like politics and law and truth and justice and that sort of thing. So another thing about high school that I should put as a marker in mock trial is that my mock trial coach, the person who was a local lawyer, a local deputy district attorney at the time, he was a really inspirational figure to me. Someone who I think more than any other figure outside my family, sort of inspired me and made me feel like I could actually have worth in the world when I wasn't like an athletic kid. I wasn't like a superstar socially, but I excelled at mock trial, and my mock trial coach was someone who brought that out of me and was really encouraging, and I think in a lot of ways an early model for what pedagogy could be, what teaching could be, and beyond just the sort of learning of content and how to be a little junior attorney in these mock trial things. Beyond that, it was just giving me sort of self-confidence, and I think that stuck with me. So even when I switched majors over to like film studies at UCSB, law and all of that was still there for me, but I just sort of I think was more attracted to talking about pop culture and getting into art and the intersection of art and politics. And that became my obsession in the years I was at UC Santa Barbara. I fell in with a department, a small and intimate department, film studies department there at UCSB that still, I think those memories, which I've shared a lot on I think the Campus Trap episodes with Ryan Boyd, that UC Santa Barbara and my experience there in the film studies department really fixed a certain romantic idea of what learning could be, what the college campus is for, and also just kind of sent me into a world of thinking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all that kind of counterculture stuff that also is an intimate part of my personality. And I would say I don't know, I hate this, it sounds pompous, but like my intellectual development. So, by the time I graduate UC Santa Barbara, I am I'm a person who's like thinking I want to work in Hollywood. I want to be the next Quentin Tarantino. And as much as I knew that was an unrealistic proposition, that was sort of where my head was at. I was thinking maybe I can work in Hollywood, become a writer, and make some sort of impact. I didn't feel like I had much to contribute or say artistically, but I did feel like I needed to be in that world somehow. So I moved down to LA right after college, and that's when, right after I moved to LA, or the Valley actually. So it depends who you are if you consider that LA or not. But I lived in Reseda, California when 9/11 happened in 2001. I think we all remember. Hopefully you remember the date of that event. But, the more I think about it, 9/11 is just really, it really is like the dividing line in my life. It's like I was 20, I think 22 years old, 23 when that happened. So it's more or less at the halfway point of my life at this point. But also it just feels like the world, you can really divide the kind of trajectory of history before and after. And I won't go too far into that, but that moment really made me think a lot about history and politics, and I got into reading Howard Zinn and all sorts of like more left-wing stuff than I had ever encountered before. So this is again post-college. I think I was a good liberal when I graduated UC Santa Barbara, or maybe some sort of like I don't know, apolitical sort of person, but definitely definitely on the liberal side of things, I would say, especially culturally, whatever that meant. I think the main point is I didn't have a clear sense of politics, but 9/11 crystallized a lot of that for me just by forcing me to read stuff that I needed to read in order to understand the world. And that's the kind of the trajectory that led me into considering going back to school, going to graduate school, and getting a PhD in history and studying American history. So that story is something I've told, and kind of lived through on the podcast a million times. But I moved to New York City. I went to the City University of New York Graduate Center. I spent too many years there teaching and writing my dissertation, which ended up being my book about GI coffee houses. And you can go back and listen to the episodes where I talk about all of that stuff. But the point is, I sort of came out of that with a very specific set of skills and a very specific set of interests. And all of a sudden, it's just like everything is not only American history, but the Vietnam War and the 20th century. And that sort of was and I think still is my life more than any of those other things that happened in the past. I've been kind of stuck in that history moment for a long, long time. And I think it's been like enormously enriching. And I think that honestly, the most enriching part of it in a weird way has been this podcast, Nostalgia Trap, which I started like at the tail end of the PhD program. I think around 2013, 2014, Justin and I started recording a few podcasts. The first iteration was called Topical Fever, which is a totally cringe title for a podcast, but whatever. We put it up. It's still there. I think you could find it on the internet somewhere, our initial conversations. But eventually that morphed into Nostalgia Trap, which became a place for me to think about history alongside anyone who wanted to listen to the show. And the show got bigger over the years, and I've been really kind of amazed at how many people were interested in listening to it. And I think that explaining that is not me. It's just it's the guests that I've been able to get. I've been able to, talk to some really, really amazing people over the years about their amazing work. And that's been, I think, honestly, the most rewarding and also the most like educational for me. I have learned so much from the authors and writers and others we've had on the show that have come on and talk about their books, talk about the research they're doing. So that's just been a really, that's why I've been doing it for 10 years. There's never been a time where I'm like, I don't want to do this. I think at some times there is a pressure, and here's the like behind the scenes, what sucks about being a podcaster. The pressure to produce stuff every week can lead you down paths to like try to, I don't know, it leads you down paths to lower quality, I think, honestly, to put stuff out that you're not necessarily really, really proud of. Not that I'm not proud of every episode we put out, but I think it's hard to put out stuff once a week. And you notice that a lot of people start podcasts and then don't follow through because it's a lot of time to do it, and that's part of it. But the other part of it is and this is like the social media Twitter element, the kind of like the need to be present on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all these other places. I've never done a TikTok, in part because it's just so fucking exhausting to be in that world. So the social media part of it is something we've gotten into a lot on the show. I hate Twitter so much, in part because of what it kind of brings out in me, like my own sort of need to react emotionally or react hysterically or amplify my anger at like some person I don't know for not having exactly the political take on something that I would have. all of those impulses are really, really ugly. And, it's something we've talked about on this show a lot too, is sort of what this has done to us, what all of this has done to us. I mean, I can remember like just hearing about what social media was in the early 2000s and being like, well, I'll never engage in that. If I engage in that and you catch me doing any of that social media stuff, you have the right to just shoot me on sight because I don't want to live like that. I don't want to be a robot. And yet, years later, here I am, deep in many social media accounts, podcast, etc. But I try not to be that social media idiot, and I think that Twitter, it brings that out, and that's maybe my own fault, whatever. But I deactivated my personal account recently. I may activate it again just to like put some stuff out for Nostalgia Trap. I'm not sure, but if Elon Musk is going to charge to use the service, I certainly won't be there. So I guess this is a call to say, find Nostalgia Trap other places. I plan on posting more stuff on Facebook and Instagram. But, all the stuff that's free goes up on YouTube always. So you can always find us there. And nostalgiatrap.com is the kind of site, the static site that just has links to all of that stuff. So find us. We'll be around even if my Twitter is not really working. Okay, so back to how I'm in law school. I think that in the last, it's kind of a cliche, but the pandemic definitely threw me into another place. My wife and I moved to California a few years before the pandemic began. The Thomas Fire here in Ventura came through like a few months after we moved here, and then the pandemic. It's been a series of cataclysmic events that weren't designed to fuck with us personally. They fucked with everybody. But they did fuck with us personally. And for me, I never really got my groove back in terms of being a teacher or a historian, certainly, professionally after leaving New York City. And that, I knew that there was that risk. And I think I was doing pretty well getting a foothold in adjuncting and teaching, but the pandemic just ruined all of that. I was able to hang on doing these awful Zoom classes, which drained all the life out of teaching. Able to hang on doing that and doing these lectures for a number of different organizations designed for the retired people. So I was going to libraries and lecturing for older people, loving that and loving doing the Zoom part of that as well. But that's not really a living. They don't pay much. It's not really a job. It's more something that I was just doing to kind of occupy some space. I loved creating those classes, and I think some of the classes I created ended up in one way or another on the Patreon with our bonus material about like Las Vegas and all that stuff. I want to pick all that stuff up again. I leave all of it open because I feel like Nostalgia Trap is really an infinite project, and we can always return to that material. Either way, I've been really at the crossroads for the last several years, and I think that I didn't want to be one of those. I'm just kind of burnt out with the whole like whining about the academic job market thing. Like it's just the way it is. There are a billion different paths that one can take in life. And it's kind of weird to just pick one and say, I'm a PhD historian. I will only accept a tenured track history job. And if not, then a great betrayal and injustice has been inflicted upon me. And I will just wither away as the historian that nobody wants. I don't want to be that guy. And, I want to be more like Maverick, the jet pilot, the guy. I'm being ridiculous, but like the guy that wouldn't just accept that, right? And would sort of find a path that works. And I think that's part of what I'm doing here too, is sort of making a lateral move that I think might pay off for me one way or another. Also, it's just something to do. So that brings me to earlier this year, I spontaneously emailed my old mock trial coach from high school, and we had lunch, and I talked with him about like what I'm doing with my life, and I said, I'm kind of at the crossroads, And he was, of course, like, you should just go be a lawyer. Go to a local law school, get your JD, and take the bar and go to work as a lawyer. And I sort of had never really seriously considered it. At the same time, him saying it made me feel like I'd been considering it my whole life, and it never really sort of popped up to the surface. It's kind of always underneath, if that makes sense. So, him saying that, I went home and I kind of thought a lot about it over the course of like a couple days, and it just made more and more sense, and ended up enrolling in a local college that has a really, really great reputation. I'm really enjoying what's going on there. And I am 1L. I am in my first year of law school and kind of wrapping my mind around the material. It's week 4 right now. I have a ton of work to do. There are like books next to me. That's part of what I think Nostalgia Trap too is what I'm thinking about, is sort of like how I'm going to continue Nostalgia Trap while doing law school. And the answer is I'm just going to do it. And I think part of it is by preserving the element of Nostalgia Trap that I want most preserved, which is the conversations between me and Justin Rogers Cooper, or the conversations where we're talking about sort of what's going on. Because to me, there is an apocalyptic element to what we discuss on this show, and I don't want to fall into my emotional social media hysteria. But part of what we talk about on the show is the fact that we're living through fucked up times where I think there are unexpected things, maybe unbelievable things may happen and have already happened. So I can't not do Nostalgia Trap when, a pandemic, the war in Ukraine, that's not enough. There's more. There's a lot more. And I think 2024, Justin and I both suspect, and I think we're not alone in this, 2024 will be a signal year in American and world history. There are too many things going on to even mention. We'll get into it with Justin on the next episodes. But there's a lot to talk about. So you can look forward to episodes of Nostalgia Trap as I move through law school here. So another thing about all of this is that, and maybe this is a part of the podcast where I get into the weird element, right? Which I think is always there on Nostalgia Trap as well. I've been guided in my life, in no small way, honestly, by sort of following the signs. I guess that's one way of putting it. Being attuned to signs from the universe that are indicating a particular path. And there are countless examples. I'll give you a couple. One is when I first moved to New York, I had a hard time finding an apartment. I said to a number of friends and said to my girlfriend at the time, who was looking for the apartment with me, that we'll know when the gnomes will show us. In other words, I didn't feel worried about it. I said, the gnomes will show us. And we all laughed about it, and that was sort of the thing. We're waiting for the gnome to show us our apartment, because we could find nothing we could afford. At one point, we got a paper copy of the New York Times, and found this tiny ad that only ran for one day, not online, only in the paper copy of the Sunday Times. And it was of a price that we could afford, the only one we could. So we went up to Washington Heights and trekked 5 flights up the stairs, and we got to the 5th floor. In front of the door that we were to knock on was a little statue of a garden gnome, and we both really laughed when we saw it. And the person that opened that door, a guy named Ray. I don't know where Ray is. I don't know if he's alive. It's a long time ago. Ray opened the door, and when we went into that apartment, we entered into the next chapter of our lives in really, really significant ways. And the gnome 100% was the answer there. My life in New York had an element that I think maybe was predetermined by the fact that I was given copies of the Paul Auster books, Moon Palace, and the New York Trilogy by the most important member of the film studies department at UCSB upon graduation. Those books offer a sort of mystical map of New York City and of living a sort of intuitive life where you're following the symbols and signs and trying not to be a crazy person while you're doing it, because those books are also about losing your mind. So, I guess that's a word of caution about following the signs too much. But the other sign that I've always had, and really started, I think, in 2004 when I was contemplating moving to New York City, I started finding dimes. And dimes became, and still remain, this sort of ever-present breadcrumb, as my friend Justin Rogers Cooper calls them, because he also is a finder of the dimes. It's the only coin we both find, and I'll leave his story to tell. He can tell his story on another episode. But with me and the dimes, I started finding them in 2004. This was at a moment when I was first starting to consider different spiritual possibilities, reading New Age books, taking psychedelic drugs, that sort of thing. Dimes became the sort of symbol of all of that, the sort of glimmering sort of symbol I would see on the ground of a parking lot in the sun, reflecting, and like that was the gateway. That was the wink from the universe. That was a sort of sign that I was on the right path. And I never found nickels or quarters or pennies or other types of coins. It was always just dimes. And it still is. And as Justin can attest, we both find them in really odd spots. Not unlike me and Justin going through a spell of finding Carlos Castaneda books in odd places. So unless there is someone who is like consciously fucking with us, maybe there's some sort of pattern to that. I don't know. So the dime thing is important. And that's another example of sort of where we've where I'm coming from when I'm thinking about law school and following those paths. Because there's just been an extraordinary amount of synchronicities and breadcrumbs and winks from the universe associated with my enrollment in law school and my beginning to engage in this path. The most startling of which involves a little dog that my grandma had in the 1980s before she died in 1985. She had a dog named Shadow. And I had a very particular relationship with my grandmother. This is my mom's mom. I was very close with her, but I was very young when she died. She referred to me as her little angel, and she promised to always watch over me. And over the years, I've always had winks from grandma that I'm like, oh, there's grandma. There she is. Like kind of unmistakable things here and there. So when she died, I ended up getting a little replica of her dog, Shadow. And that little replica, that stuffed animal, became a totem for me that lasted way too long. It was the subject of fights between my mom and dad about whether or not I should still be allowed to sleep with Shadow or bring Shadow on vacations. I'm still like 14 years old and I'm wanting to bring Shadow with me. So Shadow I actually still have wrapped up in a box somewhere. But Shadow was always, in part, tied up with the sort of mystical connection to my grandma. So, night one of of law school, 4 weeks ago, very first night. On the very first night, my professor says to us, we will know when the class is over, when my wife arrives, and she brings my dog, Shadow. And that is the end of every class now on Monday nights. The sort of mascot, unofficial class mascot, Shadow, this little dog, comes in. When I told my parents about this, they cried. They were like really, really moved by the fact that there was this sort of really eerie connection. And the first night of law school, having a dog named Shadow literally come into the classroom and lick my hand was sort of unbelievable, honestly. I had such an eerie feeling about it all night. But if I want to have the most I guess, positive spin on it. It just feels like, yeah, I'm going to be in law school for a while. This feels like the right place for me to be. I don't know what I'm going to do with a law degree. I want to pass the bar. Just being a JD PhD seems like a position that is unique in some way, and I might end up, I think, teaching. I suspect I'm not done as a teacher, and what that will mean, and teaching history of law and that sort of thing. I mean, there are a million different paths, but I think that the main point is I couldn't really just sit here being an adjunct or a half adjunct, barely making it in academia for the rest of my life. I still have some chapters left to go, and Nostalgia Trap still has chapters left to go. And I think that part of that is, I think, underlined by a really, really incredible moment I just had about 10 minutes ago. I took a walk. I often take a walk before I record podcasts just to kind of clear my mind and think about what we're going to talk about. I took my typical walk, and as I come back, right in front of the house, I look down on the asphalt, and there is a dime. And I kind of laughed to myself. I was kind of like, of course there would be a dime today when I'm about to record this little, I don't know, podcast that I'm a little nervous about. It's like sharing all of this with the audience, because it's sort of it's an evolution in something that's meant a lot to me over the years, and I hope you're all with me here. But either way, I found this dime. I pick it up, and I can show you a picture of it. I sent Justin a picture immediately because I was like, what the fuck? This dime is not a regular dime. It's a plastic dime. And it says copy on it, but otherwise it looks like a real dime. It's just made of rubber, made of plastic. And I thought, what could that possibly mean? I did text Justin, and Justin, let me bring up what he had said because I thought it was really sweet. He said, well, to me, Nostalgia Trap, the pod is transforming. Your life is transforming. The universe notices. I think it's a positive sign. To me, the dimes are like breadcrumbs. It means I'm going where I'm supposed to go. So thank you, Justin, for always, I think, putting a compelling and positive spin on the weird stuff I throw at him. But that's what we're going to continue doing on the show, and I hope that you're with us as we post new episodes as much as we can. And getting into interviews and other stuff in the future is stuff I want to continue to do. And again, I don't know how much time I will have, but I'm committed to continuing Nostalgia Trap. I think, honestly, law school is going to refresh the show in a lot of ways. There are already professors that I want to have on the show and talk with them about like legal elements of what's going on. And sort of like, the law and the law as a space in which power plays, in which capitalism plays, is actually familiar territory for me and for the left. My entire story about GI coffee houses takes place in the 1960s and 1970s, in which like lefty lawyers were really, really heroic and integral figures. And that includes, the lawyers that were in Attica that went in to negotiate are heroes, and they were sort of unbelievable in what they were able to achieve. There are a couple different other things I would mention really quickly for people wondering about like good law stuff. There's a documentary that came out, I think like the year 2000, 2001, somewhere in there, maybe later. It's called Murder on a Sunday Morning. It's about a 14-year-old black kid in Florida who is accused of murder, and the public defender that does just an absolutely stunning job in investigating the case and going after the corrupt, sadistic, and insane police officers and administrators that were framing this kid. I mean, they took this kid into the woods and put a gun in his mouth in order to coerce confession. And this guy, this defense attorney, his name is Patrick McGinnis. He died a few years ago. He just meticulously collected enough information to be able to put these cops on the stand and just end them, just humiliate them. And the sort of the pleasure he took, which had to be a kind of reserved pleasure, in destroying these men who had really attempted to end this innocent child's life, is just so empowering to watch, that those are the types of things that I think about with law school. And so, in terms of enriching the nostalgia trap, we listened to all the other students on the first nights of law school talking about why they want to go to law school. And one thing that struck me is that this school has more women than any other, than more women than men. I'll put it that way. Lots of people of color. And I heard the stories of women of color explaining that they wanted to become prosecutors or work in the district attorney's office because they had experienced or had been around domestic violence, sexual assault, abuse of children, including one student who described running a summer camp for children who were victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. And her life's purpose was to seek justice through the justice system, as flawed as it may be. And I don't know, where I'm going to be at with all of that stuff. But, in the context of a conversation about abolition and about mass incarceration and about the system, I think that it's really important to consider these types of voices and figure out where we are at. And I say we, I mean sort of a general left, but a left that is seeking to find a way to navigate the next few years, which I think, are going to be difficult years. And for better or worse, I am moving from theory to practice, and sort of moving into the legal world. And again, I'm not sure where I'll end up with that, but that's what I'm doing. And I found it all really, really compelling. And I'm looking forward to talking with Justin about it all and continuing the whole Nostalgia Trap universe with you all. So again, thank you for your emails and for your messages on Twitter. I may not have received all of your messages, but I thank everyone for writing and expressing why the show is important to you one way or the other. But we are going to continue. I hope you continue along with us. We'll be on the Patreon always as well. If you want to join that, you'll get our bonus stuff that we'll put up as much as we can as well. So thank you so much. I look forward to the next chapter of my own life, I guess, but also the next chapter of Nostalgia Trap and the next chapter of what everyone else is doing out there as well. So thanks so much for listening to my story. I hope there are still a few of you out there that are listening. Take care, and we will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.